SecurityX learners hear three risk phrases over and over: risk appetite, risk tolerance, and residual risk. They are related, but they are not the same thing. Risk appetite is the amount and type of risk the organization is willing to pursue or accept to meet business goals. Risk tolerance is the measurable boundary around that appetite. Residual risk is the risk that remains after controls are applied. At the senior level, the goal is not to eliminate risk from every decision. The goal is to make risk visible, measurable, owned, and aligned with the business. SecurityX expects you to think like an architect who can connect technical controls to executive risk decisions. A vulnerability scanner might say a system is critical. A compliance report might say a control is missing. A business leader might say the service must launch this quarter. Your job is to separate the organization's willingness to take risk, the limits it refuses to cross, and the exposure that remains after treatment. Start with risk appetite. Appetite is strategic. It is normally set by senior leadership or the board, and it expresses how much risk the organization is willing to accept in pursuit of value. For example, a startup may have a higher appetite for product delivery risk than a regulated bank. A healthcare organization may have a very low appetite for patient data exposure. A cloud-first company may accept managed service dependency risk because speed and scalability are strategic goals. Risk appetite answers: how much risk are we broadly willing to take? Risk tolerance is more operational. Tolerance turns appetite into thresholds, limits, and measurable boundaries. For example, no internet-facing critical vulnerability may remain unremediated beyond 7 days. No production payment system may have more than 30 minutes of recovery point objective. No privileged account may exist without multi-factor authentication and quarterly review. Tolerance answers: how far can we drift before the risk is outside acceptable limits? Residual risk is different again. Residual risk is what remains after safeguards are in place. If a company encrypts a database, restricts access, monitors queries, and tests backups, risk is reduced, but it is not zero. There may still be insider misuse, key compromise, application flaws, misconfiguration, vendor outage, or process failure. Residual risk answers after controls what risk is still left and who accepts it. Here is the enterprise scenario. A retail company is launching a new customer analytics platform before the holiday season. The platform improves marketing decisions, but it also processes sensitive customer behavior data. Security engineering recommends tokenization, strict role-based access, centralized logging, and a formal data retention limit. Product leadership wants to launch fast. Legal is worried about privacy obligations. Operations is worried about incident response visibility. The board has stated a low appetite for privacy risk, but a moderate appetite for innovation risk. A senior security architect should not simply say, block the launch. The better move is to translate the board's appetite into tolerances. For privacy risk, the tolerance might be no raw identifiers in analytics dashboards, tokenization before ingestion, no data retention beyond 90 days without approval, and alerting on unusual export behavior. For innovation risk, the tolerance might allow phased rollout, temporary manual review, or limited pilot scope. After those controls are applied, there is still residual risk. Maybe tokenization fails for one data field. Maybe a privileged analyst can still export aggregated reports. Maybe a third-party integration has limited audit visibility. That remaining exposure must be documented, communicated, and accepted by the right risk owner. Use this decision framework. Question 1. Are we talking about the organization's strategic willingness to take risk? That is risk appetite. Question 2. Are we talking about measurable limits, thresholds, or escalation points? That is risk tolerance. Question 3. Are we talking about what remains after controls, mitigation, transfer, or avoidance? That is residual risk. Question 4. Who has authority to accept the remaining exposure? That is risk ownership. SecurityX scenarios often test the difference between reducing risk and accepting risk. A security team can recommend controls. A security architect can explain trade-offs. But residual risk should be accepted by an accountable business or risk owner, not silently assumed by engineering. Original knowledge check. An enterprise allows cloud teams to deploy new internal applications quickly, but it requires all internet-facing systems to meet strict vulnerability remediation and logging requirements before production release. One application still has a medium vulnerability after compensating controls are added. The business owner signs off on the remaining exposure for 30 days while remediation is scheduled. Which statement best describes the remaining exposure? A. Risk appetite, because the organization supports cloud innovation. B. Risk tolerance, because strict production thresholds exist. C. Residual risk, because exposure remains after controls and is accepted for a defined period. D. Inherent risk, because no controls have been applied. The best answer is C. The organization's appetite explains why cloud innovation is allowed. The tolerance explains the measurable production requirements. But the medium vulnerability that remains after compensating controls is residual risk. Because it is accepted for a defined period by the business owner, it should be tracked with ownership, expiration, and review. The common mistake is treating appetite as permission to ignore controls. Appetite is not a blank check. A company can have a high appetite for innovation and still have low tolerance for data leakage, privilege misuse, or unmonitored production access. Another mistake is treating residual risk as failure. Residual risk is normal. The issue is whether it is understood. Residual risk is normal. The issue is whether it is understood, within tolerance, and accepted by the right authority. Here is the rule of thumb. Appetite is strategic willingness. Tolerance is measurable boundary. Residual risk is what remains after treatment. If a SecurityX scenario gives you executive direction, operational thresholds, and remaining exposure, separate those three ideas before choosing the answer. For Cert Path Lab, this is SecurityX Video 6. In the next governance, risk, and compliance lesson, we will compare quantitative and qualitative risk assessment.